And then it's
Tonight's shiur is Le'ilu Nishmat Avi Mari Dober Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And tonight we are talking about parshat Emor, and specifically we are going to be focusing on that chapter. Once it gets up on my screen, there we go. Chapter 23 in Parshat Vayikra, which happens to be the Torah reading on Sukkot, on the first day of Sukkot. And if you happen to be living outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's not only the first day of Sukkot, but also the second day of Sukkot. And if you're in Eretz Yisrael, it is the reading only on the first day. It is also the reading for the second day of Pesach. And that is independent of whether you're in Eretz Yisrael and it's a Chol HaMoed, or you're in Chutz La'aretz and it's a Chag. So in all of those cases, we read this parsha. And it is, as I said, deals, of course, with the Chagim, also known as the Moadim. So today we're going to try to talk about a few of these terminology that we use to describe the different seasonal occasions that we have on the Jewish calendar that are mandated by the Torah, and a few things about this parsha. So actually, it's interesting because this week's parsha Emor happens to be the parsha in the Torah which includes the pasuk, perhaps the most well-known pasuk in the Torah. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Emor happens to appear in this week's parsha more times than anywhere else in any other parsha. So we'll see it appear a number of times in the parsha, in the parak we're discussing, introducing different sections of the Chag. Generally, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Emor, that pasuk tells us that Hashem is speaking to Moshe, and Lemor means that this is something that Hashem is giving to Moshe, something to transmit further downstream. Obviously, he's not giving it to Moshe to keep as a secret. It's something he's telling Moshe to share downstream. And that's why it is going to be a very focal point, a pasuk of this week's parsha, because Hashem is sharing the laws of the Jewish calendar, or the special days on the Jewish calendar with the Jewish people. But it's very interestingly introduced by through the first psukim. He says, Daber el b'nei Yisrael. Hashem tells Moshe to speak to b'nei Yisrael v'yamar toleihem, and tell them, Mo'adei Hashem, the Mo'adim of Hashem, Asher Tikru Otam, that you shall call them Mikra Kodesh. Again, notice I didn't translate the word Mo'adim. I am also not going to translate for timing the word Mikra Kodesh, but these are two different terms for these times of year. Eloheim Mo'adai, these are my Mo'adim, which seems almost in direct contradiction to the fact Asher Tikru Otam, that you, the Jewish people, should call and name them, but they are my Moadim. So we have already a contradiction between the designation of these days as Moadim and how they are determined. And Be'ez Hashem, we're going to try to talk about that a little bit as we move forward. But then, interestingly enough, the next pasuk tells us that 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day Shabbat Shabbaton is a Shabbat, is a Shabbaton. It's a Mikra Kodesh. Again, that word that we just had. Kol malacha lo tasu, you should not do any malacha. Shabbat hi Hashem. It is Shabbos b'chol moshvotechem, in all of your dwelling places. So wherever Jewish people live throughout time immemorial, throughout the globe, wherever they find themselves, every seventh day is Shabbat. And yet, it seems very strange that this should be the first law that we read about when we're talking about Moadim. Moadim, Asher Tikru Otam, which we are to call Moadim, seems very strange that the first thing we list is Shabbat. I'm going to go through a couple of quick opinions on this. Very briefly, Rashi says, asks this very question, Eitzel Inyan Shabbos, Eitzel Moadot. If we're talking about Moadim, i.e. those days on the calendar that are designated based on day of the calendar, why are we talking about Shabbat? Shabbat has nothing to do with the date on the calendar. It has to do with every seventh day, or by definition, every seventh day continues to be Shabbat. So why is it listed? Why is Hashem talking about Shabbat in the parsha of the Moadot? It's to teach us that one who treats the Moadim as though they are ordinary weekdays. Hamachalel literally means profanes, but it actually means from the word lechalel is from chol. It's a stronger version. It means he treats it as an ordinary day. He treats these Moadot as an ordinary day. The Torah counts it as if he has transgressed the Shabbat and made the Shabbat an ordinary day. So that from that perspective, that they are specially designated days, they are equal to Shabbat. The Cholam Kaimet HaMoadot, and one who fulfills these Moadim, is Malnav Kilu came out of Shabbatot. It's as if he fulfilled all of these extra Shabbatot in the calendar year. So Rashi just simply says we do that comparison. Other Parshanim, and I didn't want to go through a whole lot, tell us that it's simply to tell us that even when there's a Shabbat during the Chag, it doesn't lose its quality of Shabbat just because it's a Chag. So in other words, if there's a Chol HaMoed, there's a Shabbat of Chol HaMoed during Pesach, it's not that the Chol HaMoed overrides the Shabbos and it's only Chol HaMoed. It retains its sanctity as Shabbat. So that no matter when the Chag falls, it is Shabbat falls and it supersedes it. That's what other Parshanim want to tell us. So Yitzchak says, very interestingly enough, here's it says Elahim Moadai Sheish Mitzvah Chamlacha Yesh Lakshot Lama Yizkir Kan Mitzvot Shabbat Imam Moadim Shabbat Eino Moed. Shabbat is not a moed, and we're going to see in a minute what the definition of moed is. We're going to talk about the definition of moed, and we'll see that Shabbos doesn't fit that definition. The Chekvar Hisir Kam Mitzvot Shabbat. We've had numerous times before this. Among them, of course, the Aseret HaDibrot. Among them, when we were just building the Mishkan, when we were collecting the man. All of these times we've already had numerous times where Shabbos is mentioned. Why does the Torah have to mention again Shabbat? Tshuva, the answer the Talmud Yitzchak wants to give is Hakavana Hamoadim She'atem Mikadshim Otam. Very, very important. The Moadim are something that we, the Jewish people, are in charge of sanctifying. We decide when it becomes sanctified. And that's going to be the primary difference between a Moed and Shabbat. And that's exactly what the Torah is going to say. We are the ones who designate them as Mikrai Kodesh, L'da'atchem, according to our willingness to declare them Mikrai Kodesh. Elahei Moadai. Yet Hashem says, even though we are the ones who designate them, Hashem agrees that they are His Moadim. Aval Hashabbat Eino L'da'atchem. Shabbos has nothing to do with your input. You have no input in determining when Shabbos is. Shalotikachu atem. You are not the ones responsible for sanctifying the Shabbat. Ela Shabbat hu Hashem. The Shabbat is something that has been sanctified by Hashem for all eternity. Every seventh day is Shabbat, regardless. So, what does it mean? This concept of Moadim, that we are Mekadesh them. What does that mean? Because we're going to see as the parasha goes through, the Torah is going to designate specific dates on which these Moadim occur. How do we designate them? We designate them very simply because we, the Sanhedrin, are in charge of the calendar. We determine when a new month begins. Now you'll say, wait a minute, new month is based on the new moon. And the answer is yes. But there is flexibility in terms of when a month begins. There is generally at least a 2-day period. There is one of 2 or possibly sometimes even 3 days that Rosh Chodesh can fall. Generally, it's one of 2 days. And we, the Bet Din, chooses which of those 2 days it is going to be by whether we do it because there are witnesses who came or we do it based on astronomical calculations as we do today. Each of those gives us input. We, the Jewish people, input into the Jewish calendar, and therefore we are the ones who input to determine when Pesach falls, when Sukkot falls. Not only Hashem has determined that day. So therefore, we have a portion. Now that's why these days are called Moadim. The word Moed means literally a season, a time, something that is dependent on a specific arrangement. And if we think about Moed, I would think the best translation in Hebrew is, even though you won't find it in any modern Hebrew dictionary, is it's an appointment. It's an agreed time, a designated time when 2 parties agree to meet. That's what a Moed is. It's a set aside time for a specific thing to happen. Now, in the case, as I said, in this case, it's for two parties to meet together, or multiple parties to meet together. And so the Bet Din is in charge of determining when we, the Jewish people, are ready to have this time together with Hashem, based on setting the calendar. So that's why they are called Mo'adim, and that is our job through the sanctification of the Rosh Chodesh of each month. In its time, we determine when these Chagim happen, and we're going to also talk about what the term Chag means and where it comes from in a moment, shortly. But these are the parameters. This is very different than Shabbat, and that's why, according to Toldot Yitzchak, the Shabbat precedes this to contrast to the Chagim, which we, the Jewish people, have input to. Shabbat is strictly determined by Hashem every seventh day, like clockwork. It appears, it arrives, whether we're ready or not. Whereas theoretically, with the Chagim, if we're not ready, we can say, you know what? Let's push Rosh Chodesh off. Let's, for example, there are times when the Bet Din can even push Pesach off for a whole month by declaring it a leap year, and therefore we can, and that can happen, by the way, if, for example, one of the reasons given in the halacha why you're allowed to declare a leap year is the roads are still too muddy. People can't get to Yerushalayim for Pesach. That's a legitimate reason for adding another month to the calendar. So it's clear that we, the Jewish people, through our representatives, the Sanhedrin, have some input into how the Jewish calendar works. Having said that, we're going to now go through the parsha again. We're going to start again because I wanted to contrast the first pasuk of the parsha, pasuk Bet, with pasuk Daled, which follows it. Very interestingly, again, Eila. Interestingly, here it says Eila Moadei Hashem. These are the Moadei Hashem. Now, we just talked about this concept of Asher Tikru Otam, that we have input. We, through the Bet Din, have input. Yet, nonetheless, they are Moadei Hashem. They are Moadim set aside by Hashem, based on our input. But once we, the court, the Jewish Sanhedrin, has said these are Moadim, Hashem agrees to abide by the decision made by the Bet Din, and those are the days. So even if, as we read, we know that clearly one of these Moadim happens to be day we call Rosh Hashanah, and we know that Hashem sits and judges everybody. If the court decides on the 28th of Elul, or on the 29th of Elul, the court says, you know what, we're going to push Elul off and make it tomorrow the 30th of Elul and not the first day of Tishrei. Hashem says to all the courts, okay, guys, pack up, come back another day, because Jewish people are not ready yet. The Sanhedrin said they weren't ready. They're allowed to do that, and therefore Hashem says we have to wait for them. So even though, as I said, we would think that they are our Moadim, Hashem calls them his Moadim because of his love for the Jewish people. So this whole concept of us partnering with Hashem in setting the calendar is a sign of Hashem's love for the Jewish people, that he wants us to come on these days to celebrate willingly, not because we're being forced, not because somebody's tied our hand behind our back and said, you will come today. We have input, and that is supposed to enhance the enjoyment, the rejoicing involved and incumbent in the Moadim as we go to celebrate with Hashem. Now, a couple of other terms that you'll notice I've highlighted in different colors here, one being Mikroi Kodesh, which is, we're going to find that term is going to appear again throughout this, to appear to any day where there is some type of prohibition of either. We're going to see two different terms are going to show up, one being the term melacha, the other is going to be, we're going to see a little bit later, we're going to see a term that says melechet avodah, and those two terms are going to be used to describe what we are not allowed to do on these various days. So, for example, we know that on Shabbos we're not allowed to do any melacha. Melacha is often incorrectly translated as work. You are not allowed to do work on Shabbat. Work is not what we are prohibited from doing on Shabbat. Ask anybody who is a gabbai or a balkorei or a chazan or a caterer, for example, or a waiter at a hotel who a kosher hotel. They will tell you that it is not work that is prohibited on Shabbat. It is melacha. What is melacha? Melacha, very simply, is creative activity. as we know, those things that were required in building the Mishkan, whether it is constructing, whether it is weaving, sowing, planting, reaping, all of these things where we exercise human ingenuity to take something and create or transform it into something else. That is called malacha. The other term, as I said, which we will see on the Chagim, as opposed to Shabbat, where malacha is prohibited, on Chagim only melechet avodah is prohibited, which is creative activity, basically, that involves something other than food preparation. And there are various halachot in terms of what degree of food preparation is involved. Example is sharpening a shechting knife to slaughter an animal on Shabbat for the meat, on Yom Tov for the meat. Is that allowed or not? The whole discussion in the Gemara, to what level of preparation of food is allowed on Chag, what level of preparation is not. However, you're certainly allowed to cook, to bake, to do other things that are directly involved in preparation of food, but there's one limitation. It has to be food that you're going to eat that day. So, for example, if it's 5 p.m. and Yom Tov ends at 6 o'clock, you can't go start kneading the dough because by the time it rises and you bake it, Yom Tov is going to be over. You got to wait till Yom Tov is over. Unless it's Pesach and you're doing matzah and you're going to do it in 18 minutes to have it baked in time to eat before the Yom Tov is over, then perhaps you can do it. But in general, Melechet Avodah means that type of work that is anything other than food preparation or one other category that's involved, because we have this concept of mitoch, and that is that you're allowed to carry something even if there's no Eruv, even if you live in a place where there's no Eruv, on Yom Tov that is not a Shabbat, you're allowed to carry outside of your home, because we have this principle, mitoch shehutru litzorach, since I'm allowed to carry food to my neighbor's house to feed they're allowed to eat it, so I can carry something that's not food related too. There's a whole discussion of how far does that mitoch go. We're not going to get into that tonight, but again, it's another interesting aspect of halacha. The other term we have here is mikrai kodesh. Again, the word mikrai kodesh or mikra kodesh. Obviously, we've talked about many times before the word kodesh being something that is set aside for a specific purpose. In this case, generally a purpose of coming closer to Hashem, of taking something ordinary and making it something that it enables us to come closer to Hashem. Mikra comes from the word, of course, likro, to call. So Mikra Kodesh is a time that we set aside through our designation, specifically through our verbal designation, through the word Mikra, through calling it Kodesh, by calling this day holy, as the Bet Din does when they sanctify the Rosh Chodesh, they say, Mekudash HaChodesh, this month is sanctified. Therefore, we too sanctify these days. Of course, what do we say? What's the bracha that we say at the Kiddush? Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. We say Hashem, who is Mekadesh Yisrael, who sanctifies Bnei Yisrael, and through Bnei Yisrael sanctifies the Zmanim, these different appointed times. Or we say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Yom HaKippurim, Mekadesh Yisrael v'Rosh Chodeshim, Mekadesh Yisrael v'Yom HaZikaron. So all of these things are Mikra Kodesh. We require a verbal declaration, even though you think, oh, okay, we know that Shabbos, once Shabbos comes, it's Shabbos. We don't have to say it, but interestingly enough, here on Shabbat Shabbaton, we also have the phrase Mikra Kodesh, and that is why in our Amidah and in our Kiddush, we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbat. Notice there's no Mekadesh Yisrael v'HaShabbat. It's Mekadesh HaShabbat because we have no part in determining when Shabbos is, as I've said. Clearly, this is something that is divinely ordained, that this is when Shabbat begins. But again, the concept of Mikra Kodesh is that we are to take the specific day and sanctify it verbally, as I said, through making Kiddush and through our bracha and the Amidah. The other term we have here is the concept of Chag. The word Chag in Hebrew is a cognate for a circle, because if you think in terms of words, a chog happens to be a compass, not the kind that you find north, south, and west, but the kind you draw circles with. Is called a machog in Hebrew. The word chugah is a circle, specifically, generally in terms of dancing, you dance in a chugah, a circle. So Chag comes from a circle. And again, there are different reasons why festivals are called circles, because it's a circle that appears at the same time of the circle of the year, the cycle of the year. Also, it's a time when we circle around, we come to celebrate as a group. We all circle together, like circle the wagons. We all come together to celebrate. So these are all different terms that we see in this parak relating to the different festival days. The other interesting thing that we're going to see as we go through the different sections is their relation to the calendar and how we set them. Now, interestingly enough, most of these days are going to have a fixed calendar day. So our input, the Sanhedrin's input, is when does the month start? That this place falls in. What is the next month? What month comes after what? We know that in an ordinary year, there are, of course, 12 months. In a leap year, there are 13 months. And that will determine, obviously, when the first month is. Because if you have a 13th month, it pushes off the next year beginning. But we know that in the first month, of Chamisha Asar Yom LaChodesh Hazeh, which is B'Chodesh Harishon of the first month, we know we have a Chag, which, interestingly enough, we call Chag HaPesach. We are very familiar with Pesach beginning in the first month on the 15th day. In the Torah, it is always called not Chag HaPesach, but Chag HaMatzot, the Chag of Matzot. And it is to be celebrated for Shivat Yamim. Matzot Tochelu, for 7 days we are to eat matzah, even though the Torah seems to imply that there's a mitzvah all 7 days to eat matzah. The specific command to eat matzah is in the night of the Seder. However, if you want to eat bread the rest of the Pesach, you got to eat matzah. There's no other bread to choose from. That's the choice. Excuse me a minute. So, notice again, Pesach consists of a Yom HaRishon that's a Mikra Kodesh, and then a Yom HaShvi'i that it's a Mikra Kodesh, but the whole festival is 7 days. So we have a Chag, a Mikra Kodesh, then we have 5 days that are not, but they're part of the Chag, and then we have another 7th day that is a Mikra Kodesh. That pattern is something we're obviously very familiar with because we go through it every year, but it's all to show us the beginning of Pesach, the end of Pesach is a Mikra Kodesh, is the day we come closer to Hashem. The middle days in between are part and parcel of the Chag. Each of these days, Vikraftemi Shel Hashem Shivat Yamim. On each of these days, we bring a special offering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is not enumerated in Sefer Vayikra, which is very strange. We would have thought that the Karbanot, being the focal point of Sefer Vayikra, the Torah Kohanim, we would have thought that the Karbanot Musaf should be in it right here. It should say what this Karban is. In other words, the whole chapter that we have in Parshat Pinchas that tells us, oh, by the way, on Pesach here, or on Chag HaMatzot, here's the Karbanot you bring, should have been right here. And it seems very strange that it's not in the Parshanim. Try to deal with that. Now, I found a couple of possible answers, but I didn't see anything that to me was very compelling. However, there is a machloket in the Gemara, which is one of the primary reasons given among the Parshanim, as to whether the 40 years the Jews were in the desert, they brought musafim on Shabbos and the Chagim. Were there karbanot musafim brought in the Midbar? This seems to be a historical question that the Gemara wrestles with, based on the fact primarily that we don't read about the karbanot musafim until Parshat Pinchas, which is at the end of the 40th year, as they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael. And so there is an opinion in the Gemara that the reason this is put away, this is waits until Parshat Sefer Bamidbar rather than being in Parshat Vayikra, is because it was only when they entered Eretz Yisrael that the Musafim become activated and become part of the commandments. And that's why here it alludes to it. It says, "V'kraftemi shel Hashem Shivat Yamim." When you get there, you will bring Karban for 7 days. But since you're not bringing it yet in the Midbar, we don't get the details of it here. That's one reason brought down. That seems to be the overriding reason brought down among the Parshanim as to why the Musafim, the Karbanot Musafim all of these that are going to be alluded to in this Parsha are not spelled out in detail in this Parsha. They're not spelled out until Parshat Pinchas. Okay, that's what we have to do about Matzot. Okay, Chag HaMatzot. Now again, notice, by the way, here we started with the Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Emor at the beginning. We had a new paragraph, began Elam Adei Hashem, without a Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Emor. And now the next parsha begins with Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor. So I just want to focus you on, there are some that don't, some that most of them will have a Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor. This one is about the next mitzvah. Now, if I were to ask you, okay, what's the next thing we're going to read about after Pesach? What's the next Chag? We would read about Shavuot. Not quite. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor. Before you get to Shavuot, we have something that comes in the way. Daber al bnei Yisrael. Again, we have that same phrase that we had at the beginning. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Emor. Daber al bnei Yisrael yomar tolehem, and tell them. Ki tavo el haaretz. Now again, here specifically it says only when you get to Eretz Yisrael, not in the desert. Obviously, because in the desert it's a little hard to find what we're going to be looking for. Ki asher ani noten lachem, which I'm giving to you, kartem et kitira, when you reap the harvest. Veivetem et omer reshit kitzurchem ala kohen. You will take an omer, 1/10 of an ephah of the beginning of the first thing that ripens from your harvest, should be brought to the Kohen. By the way, this is not brought on an individual basis. This is the entire congregation brings one omer on behalf of the entire congregation. The Kohen will be nifed omer lifnei Hashem litzonechem. The Kohen will raise the omer mimacharat hashabbat. Very, very interesting term here, right here, of mimacharat hashabbat. Literally, it means the day following Shabbat. Okay? Now, if we go through Jewish history, we will find that these two words are the cause of a great debate among Jewish sects, specifically between the Tzdokim, the Frushim, the Sadducees, the Pharisees of the Second Temple. Later on, the Karaites, the what I would call the rabbinic Jews. Later on, what does this phrase, this two-word phrase, mean? Does it mean that the Omer can only be brought on Mimacharat HaShabbat, the day after Shabbat? If I asked you, what's the day after Shabbat? What would you tell me? You would tell me it's Yom Rishon, right? Shabbos is always Shabbos. Day after Shabbos is always Yom Rishon. So if you tell me that's Mimacharat HaShabbat, I would say that, okay, this Karban has to always be brought on the day following a Shabbat, i.e., what we call colloquially in the secular world, Sunday. Has to be brought on a Sunday morning. You have to reap the Omer on a Saturday night, Motzei Shabbat. You bring it on Sunday morning, and that's not what it means. At least that's what the Talmud tells us it doesn't mean. Talmud tells us that Mimacharat HaShabbat, this Shabbos that's referred to here, is the first day of Pesach. Okay, HaShabbat, the Shabbat, because what is the last Shabbat that we were talking about in the chapter immediately above this? We were talking about the Chag of Matzot, and we were talking about the first day of Chag of Matzot. That's when this should be brought. Okay, so he raises the Omer before Hashem, and on that day, he brings a number of different karbanot. Interestingly enough, I would have thought, just like we don't talk about the Musafim, we should have left off, since we're not going to be bringing this karban until we get to Eretz Yisrael. Why does it mention it here? If I just told you that the whole reason why we didn't mention the Musafim here is because we're not going to be bringing them for 40 years, why does it mention this here? Great question. I wish I had a great answer. I don't. Okay? That's why I have a problem with that shot, that why the Musafim aren't here, but I don't have a better answer. I don't have any other answer. I haven't found one yet. So anyway, it brings all these karbanot, and then it tells us the following: until this day that you bring this karban, you are not allowed to eat from the new produce. In other words, this has to be before you bring the karban ha'omer, you're not allowed to bring any produce that had not ripened prior to a year ago's Omer. Can't eat it. It can't eat. So a whole year's worth of produce gets allowed. So again, depending on what country you live in and where the wheat grows, this can be a major problem, or it can be a non-issue because everything is planted and hard and is ripe, and before Pesach it doesn't get harvested till summer. If you go to Israel, to America, I know that most of the wheat crop, especially the wheat crop for shmor matzah, gets harvested in the heat of the summer. The hottest day of the year is generally, driest day of the year is generally when they pick to harvest the matzah for the wheat that's going to become matzah next year, which is already prepared and going to be cut, but it's already been planted and it's already ripened to a third prior to last year's Omer, so it's not a problem. It's planted in the winter. It's already a third or more or half ripe by the time Pesach arrives. Therefore, that is already included in this year's Omer, that which is going to be reaped in the fall and become bread, matzah, etc. next year. So that's generally, as I said, depending on where your wheat is planted and where it grows, this can be problematic. You might have to wait a while to use some certain produce. That's why if you look on your little boxes, it says Lo Chashash Yashan, that's exactly what it means. It means that the wheat is definitely had an Omer season that it's passed. So again, question we have to ask really is, what does this have to do with Moadim? Why is this chapter here in the first place? And I wish I had a great answer. I don't. But again, clearly it's linked to Pesach. This concept of Mocharat HaShabbat being linked to Pesach is why it's here. Because if it was written somewhere else, we would have said, oh, Mocharat HaShabbat, which Sunday of the year am I supposed to bring this korban? The fact is that it's clearly and directly linked to Pesach here by the fact that it comes right after it in the Torah. So that might be the reason why it's here in the middle of a parsha on Moadim where it seems to not belong. However, then we get to the next section, which will again link it back to the Moadim. Notice the new paragraph, and this paragraph again does not begin with Emor because it's linked back to the last paragraph. Even though it's a fresh paragraph, fresh set of mitzvot, but there's no Vaydaber Shem Emor because it's a continuation of the previous, because again it has that same phrase again in Mocharat HaShabbat. You were to count from this day, this Mocharat HaShabbat, this day that we just designated as Mocharat HaShabbat, which the day that you bring this Omer. How long do we count? We count, of course, Sheva Shabbatot to be Motiyen on Mocharat HaShabbat Hashviit Tisbru Chamishim Yom. Now this is where this gets very problematic. I don't know about you, but to me, if I count 7 full weeks, I don't get 50 days. I get 49 days. Makes it a little problematic when you tell me it's 50 days. I'm going to count 7 weeks and get 50 days. But, okay. And on the 50th day, you count the 50 days, and on the 50th day, you bring a new offering to Hashem. And now, unlike the Omer, which is brought from barley, because barley ripens before the wheat, this korban that we bring on the 50th day is a korban of wheat, and unlike any other korban, or virtually every other korban that is unlike virtually every other korban, it is chametz. It is not matzah. We've talked about that most korbanot, virtually all korbanot, matzah only. The exception, of course, is this korban, the korban which is called the shtei halechem, because we have two loaves, shtayim, 2 lechem, and they are chametz. The only other thing that's brought chametz is when you bring a korban shlamim, 10 of the loaves as a korban todah. Excuse me, not korban shlamim, a korban todah. 1/4 of the loaves. You bring 40 loaves, 10 of which are chametz, 30 of which are matzah. That and this are the only exceptions to the fact that a korban has to be matzah only. And again, this korban that is brought on the 50th day is called bikurim. It's called the first fruits of the wheat crop, and hence the chag that we celebrate. Then we bring all these korbanot, and the Kohen raises them. This same day that we've just counted, this day that is day number 50, on this very day, again, mikra kodesh yelachem should be a mikra kodesh. Kol melechet avodah lo tasu. Again, we don't do any melechet avodah. And again, we know this day, of course, as Chag Shavuot. So we're here later in Vayikra, in Sefer Dvarim, it will be called Chag Shavuot. Chag Shavuot l'Hashem Elokecha. That's where we get the name Shavuot from. Here it is simply called nothing, the 50th day. Now, interestingly enough, this is the only one of the Chagim that does not get a calendar day. There is no calendar day given for this Chag that we call Shavuot. Okay, it is the 50th day after the second day of Pesach. Hence, it will always fall directly 7 weeks after the second day of Pesach. But it's not given a calendar date. And if you would calculate the different possibilities for it, it can either be the 5th, 6th, or 7th day of Sivan. Now, on today's fixed calendar, it always falls on the 6th day of Sivan here in Eretz Yisrael, and in Chutzlar it's always the 6th and 7th of Sivan. But it is nonetheless does not, in the time there was a Sanhedrin, it theoretically could have been either the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th day of Sivan. So it's unique in that aspect, in that it does not have a fixed calendar date. Very different than all the other Chagim. It is fixed by when Pesach is fixed. Okay. We move forward, of course, to the next Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Emor. Again, this one is a very, very short one. Daber b'nei Yisrael Emor, tell b'nei Yisrael, b'chodesh hashvi'i b'yachad l'chodesh, first day of the 7th month, yelochem Shabbaton, zichron Teruah Mikra Kodesh. It is a memory of Teruah, and it is also a Mikra Kodesh. Kol melachad avodah lo tasu, you should not do any melachad avodah. V'kraftem mishel Hashem. Very, very short, direct, to the point. What are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about what we call Rosh Hashanah. But you'll notice the word Rosh Hashanah does not appear here. The word Yom Adin does not appear here. The only thing we have here, Zichron Teruah, a remembrance of Teruah. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, in Sefer Bamidbar, it will be called Yom Teruah. Okay? It will be called Yom Teruah, and that's just why the one place is called Zichron Teruah, the other is called Yom Teruah. But again, we have this concept of course, of blowing the shofar. Shofar is not mentioned here, other than the word Teruah is mentioned. It doesn't say what kind of Teruah you're supposed to be remembering, but it's a Zichron Teruah. Again, this, by the way, is the only place in the Torah, other than in Pinchas, where we read about a special korban that's brought on this day, that this Chag is mentioned. It's the only place in the Torah that this Chag is mentioned. And as I said, it seems to be almost enigmatically mentioned. It says it on the 7th day that it's a Zichron Teruah, very, very sketchy description of the Chag. And it's never called a Chag, by the way. Okay? Unlike quote, Pesach and Sukkot, which are called Chagim, this day is not called a Chag. And then, of course, we get to the next parak, which is again, Vaydaber Shalom Moshe Emor, Ba'esor lachodesh hashvi'i hazeh Yom Kippurim. Okay, on the 10th. Now, this one again, notice it gives you a name, Yom Kippurim, tells us a date, calls us a Mikra Kodesh, and this one, unlike the other Chagim of Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkot, where Melechad Avodah, here on Yom Kippur, it's Kol Melacha Lo Tasu, no cooking, it's a regular, similar to Shabbat, in that sense that you can't do any Melacha. Again, it's Yom Kippurim lechaper aleichem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. This day is dedicated to its entire purpose is to try to achieve kapara before Hashem. And of course, we know if we looked in last week's Torah reading, we know that there was a large ceremony, a huge set of korbanot brought by the Kohen Gadol on behalf of himself, on behalf of all the Kohanim, on behalf of all of Am Yisrael, as described in great detail in Parshat Achrei Mot in the beginning. That and this are the two mentions of Yom Kippurim in the Torah, and of course, other than Parshat Pinchas, those are the 3 times that Yom Kippur is mentioned in the Torah. Unlike Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which are mentioned numerous times in the Torah, both in Shmot, in Vayikra, in Bamidbar, and in Dvarim, we have mention of the Shalosh Regalim. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in terms of their number of mentions in the Torah, take a very backseat to the Shalosh Regalim. They are mentioned significantly fewer times. Again, of course, I took all the Psukim of Yom Kippur, you'd probably get more, but it's only mentioned in these 3 contexts. And finally, of course, we have the Chag of Sukkot, which again, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Emor. And again, the date, Chamishasa Yom LaChodesh Hashvi, 15th day of the 7th month. It is a Chag, it is a Mikra Kodesh, Melechad Avodah you're not allowed to do. 7 days, you should bring a korban. Now, this is very interesting because we know that on Pesach, we talked about bringing a korban for 7 days, and we said the first day is a Shabbaton, and the 7th day is a Shabbaton. Sukkot is very different because it tells us that we're to bring a korban for 7 days, but then it tells us, Bayom Hashmini Mikra Kodesh Yelachem. The 7th day of Sukkot is not a Mikra Kodesh. The 8th day, doesn't say the 8th day of what? It tells us that Sukkot is 7 days. It's very, very interesting. It says, Chag HaSukkot Shivat Yamim LaHashem. It's 7 days. But that tells us, by the way, on the 8th day is a Mikra Kodesh. It's not Sukkot. As we know, we don't eat in the Sukkah. We don't take the Lulav. Those are the 2 mitzvot that define Sukkot. We don't do those on Shmini Atzeret. If you live in Chul, then you might sit in the Sukkah, but that's a whole different issue. But we know clearly that Shmini is not part of Sukkot, yet it's in the same chapter. So it's sort of connected to Sukkot. That's why they both are called Zaman Simchatenu, but it's sort of different than Sukkot. Very interesting concept here. Very different than Pesach, where all 7 days are Pesach. You got 7 days. There's a Chag at the beginning. There's a Chag at the end. Sukkot is a Chag at the beginning, but there's no Chag at the end. There is a Chag at the end. You see, because shiur is Sukkot is 7 days, but it's not 7 days. It's 8 days. So it's a very, very interesting concept. The Gemara has a whole thing called that Shmini is regel b'fnei atzmo. It's its own Chag, which means there really aren't shalosh regalim. There are 4 regalim. But that's another whole different discussion for a different time. Here again, we have this concept of Mikra Kodesh, Kom Lechad Avodolo Tasu, and we would think, based on what we've been doing up above, that's the end of the paragraph, right? We've read through it all. We read through Sukkot. We had some Mikra Kodesh, it's a Chag, it's Melachad Avodah, what the day is. We would think that would be the end of the paragraph. It's not. The Torah continues now. Eila Moadei Hashem. Now it continues with the summary. These things, everything we've talked about up to now, Pesach, the Karban HaOmer, the Chag that we call Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and for Shmini, these are the Moadei Hashem Asher Tikro Tami Kroi Kodesh, which you should call me Kroi Kodesh. On each of these Lakriv Ishel Hashem, to bring a Karban to Hashem, Ol Amin Chazevach V'Nisachim Dvar Yom B'Yomo, Milvad Shabtot Hashem, aside from the Shabbatot of Hashem, Milvad Matnotechem, and all the offerings that you want to bring voluntarily. And we would again thought, okay, that's it. Now we're finished, right? Wrong. Suddenly, out of nowhere, we suddenly now go back to Sukkot. We've had this summary that interferes in the middle, and all of a sudden now we're going to get back to Sukkot. Wait a minute. Oh, by the way, remember I just told you about on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you are gathering all your crops in, you have to celebrate this Chag for Shivat Yamim. Didn't you just tell me that 3 psukim ago? Why is it repeating it? Because now it's going to tell me all the details of Sukkot. Well, we had that above too, right? That's nothing new. But now we have 2 special mitzvot that we're going to have for Sukkot. One is on the first day of Sukkot, we take what we call the Arba Minim. You celebrate before Hashem for 7 days. Now, interestingly enough, if I were to give a quiz on Ola L'Regel, mitzvah of going up to Yerushalayim 3 times a year, how many days of the year did you spend in Yerushalayim? When you went up for Pesach, how long did you have to stay in Yerushalayim? I'm sorry? We got 1 day here, we got 7 days here. And the answer is neither, 2 days. You had to stay 2 nights, and actually it was 2 nights and one, it was 3 days and one night, but it was really, like you go on a vacation for 3 days and 2 nights. It's the day you get there, you have 1 real day, and then it's the day you're leaving already. Okay? But that's what Pesach was. You had to get there on the 14th, because you had to be there in time to bring your Karban Pesach. Okay? And then you stayed for the first day of Chag. You couldn't leave on Chag. You left. You had to stay overnight. You couldn't leave Motzei Chag either. You had to stay overnight, and you could leave the first day of Chol HaMoed. Okay? Shavuot was only 1 day. There was only 1 day. So you went up Erev Shavuot. You stayed for Shavuot. You could leave Motzei Yom Tov, but by then it was probably too late to leave. Too much traffic going anyway. So you waited till the next morning. Nobody traveled at night anyway. Back in those days, you waited till the next morning. Sukkot, you got to stay the whole 7 days. And actually, you got to stay the whole 8 days. Okay? Why? Because you've got to celebrate before Hashem for the whole 7 days. By the way, this is the basis for the fact that the mitzvah of the Arba Minim, of the 4 speeches that we take on Sukkot, is not, if you live too far and you're not going up to Yerushalayim, it's only 1 day. Because it says, when you're going and taking it, it's only on the first day of Sukkot. When you're going to Yerushalayim, you take it all 7 days. However, we today take the rule for all 7 days because of a takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai after the destruction of the Mikdash, so that people would not forget this mitzvah and only do it once a year. He says that we should remember that in the Beit HaMikdash, it's a mitzvah for all 7 days. We do it for 7 days, even outside of Yerushalayim. Okay. We celebrate this as a chag. Notice on Sukkot, more than all the other days we've talked about, this word chag appears very, very prominently. It is a chag And Chag, if we think about Chag and the concept of celebration, again, we have usmachtem, this word of you should rejoice. We have rejoicing associated with Sukkot. We have rejoicing associated with Shavuot. We never have the word of Simcha associated with Pesach, but we do have it multiple times with Sukkot, because and that's of course why we call it Sukkot Zman Simchatenu, because Sukkot, we finish the harvest. We can really be thankful because we don't have a whole full year of uncertainty in front of us. Now we've got this wonderful harvest. We can rejoice because Hashem has given us this bountiful harvest. And that's exactly what Sukkot is about. And then we get one more mitzvah of Sukkot, that, of course, the one that we're most familiar with. It gives its name, Basukot Yeshvu Shivat Yomim, Kol Ezrach Yisrael Yeshvu B'Sukkot, L'man Yidu Dorotechem Ki B'Sukkot Oshafti Et Bnei Yisrael Otziot Tamei Eretz Yisrael Yeshem Lokechem. Again, we have the mitzvah of Sukkot. Now again, we think, okay, that's it. We finally had enough. We're finished, right? Chapter's over. No, we're not finished yet. One more pasuk, which again, Vaydaber Moshe, Modei Hashem Bnei Yisrael, pasuk we're all familiar with. The summary: Moshe, Hashem, what did Hashem did at the beginning? Hashem told Moshe, relate all these days to Bnei Yisrael. Moshe did exactly as Hashem told him and relates all of these Moadim to Bnei Yisrael. And with that, of course, we conclude the parak. Question, of course, that many of the Parshanim ask is, why do we have this break in the laws of Sukkot with this summation of the chapter, and then suddenly almost, and as I said, I don't have great answers. I've gone through a number of Parshanim and really haven't found anything that I thought was a great answer or anything that, and I'm still looking, and hopefully one of these days I will find something good. But again, it's a very strange way of introducing this parak, because if we think about it, it tells us in brief the laws of Sukkot, says the parak is over, and then stops. Wait, let's reopen that and give you all the details about Sukkot, and then we have a much shorter summary at the end. This chapter, as I said, seems to be strange in that way. It's also strange, as I said, the fact that it does not include all the Korbanot Musaf, which we would have thought it would, because, as I said, we're in Torah Kohanim. And Be'ezrat Hashem, someday I will find out the answers to that, be able to share with you, or something I think is a good answer. But at this point, we're going to say that I hope that all of the things about the Chagim, I think the most important part of the Chagim is the fact that we call them by so many different names: Moed, Mikra Kodesh, Chag, each of which have a different part and show a different part of the richness of these days that we celebrate, that we meet with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we interact with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we try to come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the fact is that if we understand and appreciate them and utilize them properly, it's a great opportunity for us as individuals, for us as Klal Yisrael, as a community, to re-establish and cement this strong relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think it's also a very wonderful time to establish your own relationships within the family, because we think about it, we're all busy all week long, we're all running around all Shabbos, and it's really, the Chagim are probably, Chagim and Baruch Hashem, we should only have lots of Smachot also, are the primary times that we get together with our families and celebrate. And I think that's one of the benefits that the Torah wants us to have from these Chagim. That's why it's V'samachta with all of your family. If we look at this equivalent parsha in Sefer Dvarim, it tells us V'samachta atov itcha v'techa avtecha v'metcha v'gerecha asher yisharecha v'alevi, that we celebrate this in a group. These Chagim are not intended to be done alone. They're intended to be done with groups, and share the wealth, share the joy, and share being Jewish, and help others who haven't yet reached the level you're at to grow. And you should be seeking out others who are at higher levels than you are to help you grow in your awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in your awareness of the beauty and the richness of the mitzvot and the Torah. And when we're able to do that, maybe we can have a little impact on the rest of the world, and we can zocha to Gula Shleim Meher V'Yameinu. Thank you all. I open up for questions, comments, and feedback at this point. Anybody? Gershon, go ahead.
English is written as a syrup without a vowel.
Yes. Gershon's question is, why is Mikra Kodesh written chaser without a vav in general? The word Kodesh in Torah, in Tanakh Hebrew, there are many words that are written chaser always. And then there are words that, and I think Kodesh is one of them. It's generally written chaser. Kadosh is generally written malay. Kodesh is generally written chaser. I'm gonna now. Maybe I'm gonna have to go look that up, and but I think that's the general rule in the Tanakh, is that Kodesh is chaser and Kadosh is malay. But as I said, that's just as I said, the fact that today we a lot more frequently in modern Hebrew publishing, whether it's everything is written Malay because it's generally published without nikud. Okay, if you think about your chumash, most chumashim are printed with nikud in them. Granted, the Torah doesn't have nikud, but most of the chumashim were printed with nikud. But again, the Torah wasn't. That's just a usage. Maurice, go ahead.
How do you define atzeret?
How do I define atzeret? Oh, okay. The word atzeret is used in context of Shmini. The word atzeret comes from the word la'atzor, to hold back, to keep something back. We have that word mentioned in connection with a number of places where la'atzor means you're keeping something from going back to its regular course. The origin of the word, and the parshanim who explain the word atzeret, is Hashem tells Bnei Yisrael, I want you to stay back for one more day. Stay, we just had this beautiful visit, for a week-long visit, and I know you're going home, but I'm probably not going to see you again until Pesach. So wait, let's spend one more day together before we leave. That's what atzeret. That's okay. The town
was finally realized that this is about the end of Pesach.
In the Talmud, when the Talmud uses the word atzeret, it always refers to the Chag of Shavuot, not the Chag of Shmini. The Torah uses the word atzeret only in the context of Shmini, and the Talmud wants to tell us that the reason they call Shavuot atzeret is because Shavuot is really the atzeret, the 8th day of Pesach. It's delayed for 7 weeks. That's a whole different drasha. But yes, but the word atzeret is to stay back. That's the origin and the derivation of the word. Okay, from latzor.
Is the Yom Tov of the Yom. Sorry.
Mezrich.
Yeah, where would
Okay. Maurice is asking a question. In his Chumash, it says that there was a difference between the Yom Kippur of the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov. And I would suspect that is because of their different philosophic outlooks on Judaism. The Vilna Gaon was a much more focused on the severity, not severity is not the right word, the solemnness of the day. Whereas the Baal Shem Tov who was the founder of what we call today Hasidut, was much more focused on the celebration of the day. In other words, there's a solemn aspect of Yom Kippur. Clearly, we're fasting, we're praying all day. I suspect the Baal Shem Tov's minyan had a lot more singing than the Vilna Gaons. The Vilna Gaons probably had more chazanut, which was much more of a solemn nature, because those were their two hashkafas. So, but again, Yom Kippur, there's no difference in the practicality. They're both fasting, they're both davening, they're both saying piyutim. No. Vilna Gaon, both, excuse me. The Baal Shem Tov was also an Ashkenazi. He's not a Sephardi. Sorry. Okay. But again, there's the other two are followers are later followers. One, Balatanya, is the founder of Chabad Lubavitch, Chabad Hasidish. Hasidus the Magid was also a Talmud of his. Again, they are different ways of finding Hashem, of expressing your closeness and your relationship with Hashem in your life. Okay, that's what that is. Okay. Any other questions, comments? David, you gotta unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you said that 7 weeks adds up to 49. You don't know how you got to 50. But the pasuk says ad macharat hashabat hashavi. So it's up to after the day after, it sounds like, which would be the 50th day. Ad macharat shavat
Right.
hashavi, right?
Right. But it tells us, my question is, David, it says, Tisperu Chamishim Yom, you count 50 days. Last I checked, our Omer count ends after 49. We don't count the 50th day. Of course, everybody kiddingly says tonight is the 50th day on the night of Shavuot, but we don't make a bracha and count day number 50. Okay? So, I mean, again, the question is, why does it say Tisperu Chamishim Yom in that context? That's the question.
Because we don't to say we counted, you would mean only if it was with the bracha of the Omer. Otherwise, just saying it's the 50th, recognizing that it is now Shavuot, it's the 50th day, it hasn't been counted specifically.
Right. It's no.
I think that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way the Talmud says it. Is that Ad Mimachar Shabbos Hashvid until the end of the 7 full weeks, you're counting to the 50th day. So there, it's Chamishim Yom generally means an ordinal day number 50, but here it's used in a construct state as 50th day. So Tisbu we count until Chamishim Yom, until the 50th day. And that's the way the Talmud looks at this. It says that it's the 50th day. So thank you for your question.
Isn't the key word there odd? No, you count up to the 50th day.
Well, it's yes. No, but as I said, the question is, how do you parse that pasuk? Ad Mimachar Shabbos Hashvi, because if you look at the trop, let me go put it back up on the screen, okay, for a second. Hold on a minute. Let me get that back up on the screen. And we go back to that pasuk. See, if you look at the notes, which I got to get to, I can't. This thing here. See, it says, Ad Mimachar Shabbos Hashvi'it, pause, Tisbru Chamishim Yom. See, the Chamishim Yom goes with the Tisbru, not with the Ad Mimachar Shabbos Hashvi'it. If you look at the notes, okay, so this is a Ma'ipach Pashta Sakev Katan. That's what the problem is. In other words, it's Ad, yes, I agree with you, Ad Mimachar Shabbos until after you're counting the 50th to reach the 50th day is basically what you're doing. So it's really, you're right, it really is Tisbru, you're counting till the end of the 7 full weeks. Okay. So yeah, as I said, it's one of those psukim that leads itself to multiple interpretations, and that's where we have to rely on Chazal to come up with what is the appropriate interpretation of how we celebrate and how we keep Shavuot, whether we keep it on the 50th day or the 51st day. Okay. Thank you all. Any other questions, comments? All right, have a good night. Have a good rest of the week.